In the season finale, it is finally the day of the baptism. Shawn has made a bunch of food for the event, including integrating Jericho's placenta into some of the food, and not telling anyone, which is super weird. Toby and Leanne were not invited to the church. They were getting everything prepared, and they will be serving the group that comes back home for the reception. And shortly after everybody arrives back, Dorothy is in the living room kind of bragging about the fact that she was able to do a natural birth. But in the middle of Dorothy patting herself on the back to this crowd, she sees a little girl walk by, which catches her eye. And then suddenly everybody gets an Amber Alert on their phone. Dorothy doesn't pay any attention to it, following the girl upstairs who is sitting on the steps. And the little girl is holding a doll. And when Dorothy tells her that's a really nice doll, the little girl says it's not a doll, it's some name that the little girl gave the doll. And the little girl gives Dorothy the doll to hold, but when she does that, Dorothy suddenly remembers holding the fake Jericho doll. She's in a little bit of a shock, and she ends up dropping this little girl's doll down the steps, but the little girl doesn't understand what's happening. She just walks down the steps, picks up the doll, and looks at Dorothy like, "Yo, what the hell?" and then walks off. Back in the living room, however, the cameraman that had filmed the baptism puts it on the TV. But Julian, who is watching it, yells at the cameraman, "Yo, rewind, go back." And when he does so, there is Leanne's Uncle George, along with a female that we can only assume is Aunt May, standing across the street. And Leanne saw it too. So Julian heads out and calls his private investigator, telling him that they saw Uncle George, but it was on camera, so if you see him, take him out. And as Leanne is watching from afar Julian talk to the PI, Natalie comes over and says, "Hey, I might as well play the game. Can I hold the baby? Where is he?" But when she goes outside to get Jericho, she can't find him. And she's kind of freaking out a little bit. She runs up to his crib where there's a woman holding Jericho, and it's Leanne's Aunt May. Downstairs, however, in the cellar, Shawn is going downstairs to get some champagne when Uncle George shows up, and immediately Shawn knows who he is. He goes to get some money and tries to pay him off with $6,000, but Uncle George doesn't want that. So Shawn yells at him, "What do you want? If you don't want money, do you want Leanne? Do you want the baby?" But George starts to explain the backstory of where Leanne came from, saying that when the fire happened in Wisconsin, everyone just believed that Leanne was dead, and it was just easier to make everybody think that. George and May brought Leanne to PA and raised her. He tells Shawn, "Your wife wouldn't remember meeting Leanne. It happened so long ago, but Leanne never stopped talking about it. How beautiful Dorothy was and how nice she was to her. And it definitely helped that every single night on the news, it was like Dorothy was telling her stories and tucking her in." He goes on to explain how Leanne likes to help the people that she likes and hurt the people that she doesn't. And he fears that Leanne has done something that can't really be easily put back together. But Shawn tells him, "I just want to know whose child this is." And George tells him, "You know the answer to that," but Shawn doesn't. And George yells at him, "Well, if it wasn't your child, why did you keep it?" And Shawn explains that it was for Dorothy because she needed it. But George gets up and asks him, "Well, what did Shawn need? What's going to mend Shawn? What wounds do you have? What has she done to you?" And Shawn realizes it's the splinters and the fact that ever since she arrived, he hasn't been able to taste any food. And George has Shawn's hands clasped, and he's gotten on his knees in kind of a praying formation. And Julian comes in and sees it, but Shawn tells him to stay back because he's cool with what's going on. George tells Shawn, "Ask him. Ask and you shall receive. What do you want?" And Shawn says, "I want Jericho to stay. I want my son back." And this is a big moment for Shawn, who seems to be buying into all of this. But back upstairs in Jericho's nursery, May can tell that something has happened to Leanne. It doesn't seem like Leanne is infatuated with Dorothy anymore, and she asks her, what did she do? And Leanne fills her in on everything that happened, but says it was a mistake. It wasn't baby Jericho's time to go. But May tells her that God had a plan for that baby, and you thought you knew better. May tells Leanne that Dorothy will hurt that baby again, and she will hurt you. But Leanne feels like the Turners deserve a second chance, and if she can do that for him, she's going to. But May feels like the house has changed Leanne. Dorothy shows up, though, because she needs to bring Jericho downstairs, and she's surprised to see this random woman in Jericho's nursery. And Leanne introduces the two, saying, "This is my Aunt May." May thanks Dorothy for all the kindness that the Turners have shown to Leanne, but she says, of course, she's like a member of the family now. She does take Jericho down because her dad is going to make a speech. Her dad doesn't really care where this baby came from because Dorothy seems to be in a really good state. But when she does take him down, May turns to Leanne and says, "Come home, both of you." But Leanne is really concerned with what would happen to Dorothy if she did that. And May says, she would wake up tomorrow and you would both be gone. No more dolls, no more pretending. It'll be as everything was meant to be. Besides, you're our servant, not hers. But everybody heads downstairs to do the toast. Shawn ends up cutting open a bottle of champagne. But as soon as he does that and hands the bottle over to Toby, he goes over to George saying, "Okay, that's it. He's ours now, for life." But George gives him some religious mumbo-jumbo that Shawn doesn't really understand. And before Shawn can get an answer as to what it means, Toby comes over and hands him the broken bottleneck, saying that it's good luck and to give it to Jericho on his 21st birthday. Dorothy, meanwhile, walks up to Aunt May and says, "Have we not met before?" But May says, "Oh no, Dorothy, we've never met. That's impossible. I would have remembered you." But then there's a knock at the door from the Philadelphia Police Department. They've gotten the address and think that there's a missing child in the house. And Sean gets a pit in his stomach. He is crushing this broken bottleneck in his palm. Turns out, though, this had nothing to do with baby Jericho. It had to do with that little girl and the doll from the steps. The police figured that she saw the procession going from the church and just followed everybody home. But Sean's hand is pretty cut up, and when he goes to clean it, he realized that he can't feel anything. There's no pain. So he can't taste, and now he can't feel pain, and he figures Leanne has got to be doing this to him, but Julian says, "Do not let her get inside your head." And while that was going on, Leanne was in her bedroom looking outside because Aunt May and Uncle George haven't left. They're across the street, just staring at her. Eventually, though, everybody leaves, and the last ones to do so are Julian and Natalie. And Sean tells Julian that he prayed for Jericho to come back. And he doesn't know how, but he knows that the kid up in that nursery is his son. He knows that somehow Leanne brought his son back to him. But Julian doesn't really give into that conversation, telling him that he's paid the private investigator to stay on the block and just keep an eye on things. He doesn't expect anything to happen, but just in case. And after Natalie and Julian leave, Sean heads back upstairs, and both Sean and Dorothy tuck Jericho in for the night. Although, unfortunately for that private investigator, something does happen. While sitting in his car, he looks up and sees Aunt May standing in the street pretty close to his car. And when he gets out to see if she's all right, Uncle George is behind him. And when Toby leaves shortly after, Toby walks by the private investigator's car where the door is open, but no one's around. Toby really doesn't think anything of it and just keeps walking home. Later that night, though, Sean goes downstairs to test out this whole "I can't feel pain anymore" situation, putting his hand over an open flame on the burner. But the closer he gets, he still cannot feel pain. Dorothy, though, is getting ready for bed when something jogs her memory, and she rushes downstairs and starts putting in old news footage that she did. And there's one story from Wilmington, Delaware, where there was a standoff with the police and a cult called the Church of the Lesser Saints. There were reports of gunshots, and at the time, there was thought to be about 12 people in this compound, half of which were children, and the compound was led by Aunt May. And when Dorothy sees that, she goes upstairs to talk to Leanne, but Leanne is gone. All of her stuff is packed. She's left. She rushes to Jericho's nursery, and when she opens the door, a flashback hits her of the police taking Jericho's dead body out of the crib. And when she walks over to the crib, the living, breathing Jericho is gone, and it is replaced by that doll. So the big question is, what happened to Leanne? Well, Leanne walked outside, where in the middle of the street were about 30 people waiting for her. And as she made her way through them, right at the front was Uncle George and Aunt May. And all these people have a group hug in the middle of this residential street. A cop even drives by it and sees it. And when he backs up his patrol car, though, everybody is gone. And that is how Season 1 of Servant ends. Thank you so much for watching this recap. I really appreciate it. Consider subscribing to the channel. If you don't, though, I'm not going to be upset. But if you like the video, hit thumbs up. If you don't, hit thumbs down. Just don't be mean in the comment section. I have feelings too. And hey, if you have a social media platform, there is a share button for a reason. Sharing is caring, so put that John on your MySpace. But thank you so much for checking this recap out.